And author Hugh Hewitt, in your book, GOP 5.0, Republican Renewal under President Obama, Rules for Rebuilding the Conservative Majority in 2010 and 2012. What does the 5.0 stand for?
Well, there have been 5 iterations, including the current one, Peter, of the Republican Party, going back as far as really Nixon, and then we went through the Reagan, and then we went through the Bush iteration. And now we're into number 5. When Nixon remade the party in the 60s, he took what was essentially Taft-Eisenhower modus operandi with a Goldwater overlay and began to change the dynamic within the party. That has subsequently gone through a couple more transformations. Now there needs to be another one that replaces what was left at the end of the Bush presidency and says, okay, basically we're going to rebuild the Reagan coalition, but with a new aggressive technology and a new aggressive look around the world on issues like trade.
Well, in your book, Painting the Map Red, you write that Richard Nixon's first presidential loss in 1960 taught him a lesson that hardball works and that narrow wins can be manufactured with small margins, and he started playing little ball. What do you mean by that?
Little ball's drawn from baseball. It's where you try and get your singles, you go for bunts, you get one run an inning, as opposed to the electoral landslides that marked 1980 with Reagan and 1972 with Nixon. And I think to a certain extent, although 2004 ran up a pretty good electoral college margin for George W. Bush, it was really the triumph of little ball on 50 different stages. It's where Karl Rove and a great team of political operatives went state by state and jammed the base, just drove those numbers sky high and manufactured a very healthy electoral college win. On the other hand, President Obama's victory in 2008, much more long ball. I mean, they went across the map. They played in places like Indiana. No one had thought a Democrat could play for a very long time. And that was the antithesis of little ball, a national campaign with big themes. And I think the Republicans are going to have to look ahead to, yeah, they got to, some people say, let's all just get Florida back. Let's go back and get Indiana. If we can shift Virginia back, then we can win the White House in 2012. I don't think we're in an era of little ball right now. I think they've got to come up with a competing vision that is as complete in its details as President Obama's was vague on its details in 2012.
Does the GOP currently have that vision?
It's getting there. I have been this weekend at the Americans for Prosperity Summit in Crystal City, Virginia, and I have been with Bill Bennett, Michael Medved, Dennis Prager, Mike Gallagher, my colleagues on the Salem Radio Network, across the United States between the 100th day of Obama's presidency and a few weeks thereafter, talking to thousands of people. And there is a new energy. A lot of that has been manifest in the Tea Party movement. A lot of that has been manifest in the town halls that Congress either did or did not have in August. And I think what you're going to see is an extraordinary grassroots effort in 2010. I think you're going to see Bob McDonnell win in Virginia in 4 weeks quite handily. It's going to be very close in New Jersey. That's an overwhelmingly blue state. Politico this morning is reporting that, in fact, Democrats are becoming increasingly optimistic about New Jersey, but we'll wait and see. So the Republican Party has already begun the process that the Democrats went through in 2000, 2001, 2004, and I think we're watching Republican operatives act much more quickly than Democrat operatives did when they were turned out in 2000.
Back to GOP 5.0 Republican Renewal. These are the rules that you list in this book for the GOP for rebuilding the conservative majority, what you call it. Let's start with the first 3. Start now to win in 2010. Candidates must have a genuine, cheerful optimism rooted in an appreciation of America's unique role in the world as a precondition to political success, and pursue the youth vote. If you could take those one by one.
Sure. Well, let's start with start now. They did. Not as quickly as I had hoped, but they are now very much in the game. It's 13 months away from 2010, and we see things like conservativesenators.com, put together by Jim DeMint to fund center-right senators in their quest to take open seats. We've seen candidates show up in, right now, Connecticut, Rob Simmons. We've seen candidates, Mark Kirk, show up in Illinois for the Roland Burr seat that he won't contend for. Got some great candidates in Nevada, especially Danny Tarkanian and Sue Bowden. They're out there. In California, you've got Carly Fiorina, Chuck DeVore. They're in the hunt already. And in a number of districts across the United States, you've got lots of good congressmen. I've been campaigning for a fellow named Tom Lucero, for example, in the 4th Congressional District in Colorado, where he wants to take back a seat that was Marilyn Musgrave, traditionally a Republican seat, got swept away in 2008. So I think you see that the Republicans have been doing candidate recruitment very well. They're ahead of Democrats in fundraising in the last 3 months, and that's a very good, very interesting sign. So that's number one. Number two, attitude, cheerfulness. There's nothing worse than a long face and a grumpy candidate. And the Republicans have had a lot of those. It's not hard to be excited about America. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful country. We are the last best hope of America. We are, in fact, all the good things that have been said about us. And I think, in fact, President Obama's apology tour did a great deal to crystallize for independents in America that sort of rhetoric is not what they like when he went abroad right after his presidency. I don't even think they cared much for the two speeches at the UN a couple weeks ago. And I certainly think that candidates who come equipped and ready to celebrate as opposed to criticize the American exceptionalism that is true will find themselves welcomed in. And then part three, remind me, Peter.
Pursue the youth vote.
Oh, the youth vote. Well, I wrote a piece, a pamphlet in the summer of 2008, letter to a young Obama voter, because my nephew was going to vote for Obama, and he did. And he'd been a conservative his whole life, and pro-life conservative. And I wrote this as a kind of an attempt to say, look, I understand the cultural wind at the back of the Obama presidency. It's a wonderful thing for an African American to win the nation's highest office. He's very gifted in a set speech. He has got the heavy artillery whenever he is ready to go out there and do it. He can inspire, he can motivate. First Lady's amazingly charismatic. So it was a moment in time that I think brought a lot of young people by simple operation of enthusiasm to his side. All right, that's done. That's great. Now let's take a look at what's happened since. An explosion of federal funding, appeasement abroad, a collapse of almost epic proportions in our way forward in Afghanistan. We are lost right now in Afghanistan, and General McChrystal's comments this week prove that. And so I think the youth vote will come back a little bit, but Republicans have got to pay attention to them, and especially this. The generational transfer of wealth that is occurring was already substantial and profound and wrong up to the last year. It has accelerated at warp speed so that this generation, under President Obama's leadership, Speaker Pelosi's leadership, Leader Reid's leadership, is stealing a massive amount of money and the future from the next two generations. They ought not to be happy about that.
Rules 4, 5, 6, and 7. Pursue rational immigration reform while shunning the politics and the rhetoric of anti-illegal immigration extremists. Give the Republican National Committee, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and the House Republican Committee $10 each every month.
Let's start with the latter. Funding the party apparatus is very, very important. And it is important because when you're out of power, it's very difficult to raise money not far from here on K Street. And it becomes necessary to, in fact, bankroll any kind of recapitulation into balance, if not majority, via $10 donations of enormous numbers of grassroots people. On air not long ago, I mentioned that Danny Tarkanian, the son of the former great basketball coach at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and then up at Fresno State. Danny Tarkanian was running. I said, give $10 to Tark if you want to send a message to Harry Reid on health reform. He had thousands of people do that. I mean, I was a little bit stunned, as he was. And I'm not even involved in the primary. He's just a good guy. He's a good conservative. It was easy to say, 10 for Tark. That tells me that the grassroots are eager to identify and fund a return to balance in Washington. That's all those three opportunities. And those are the three parties, the RNC, the NRCC, and the NRSC.org are the three arms of the Republican Party. Immigration policy, we can take a long time on this. This is very important to get right. The reason that a lot of previously red states are now purple, if not light blue, is because the Republican Party was perceived as anti-immigrant. It was perceived as anti-immigrant because a lot of the conversation running up to and surrounding the debate over the Immigration Reform Act that was known as McCain-Lieberman was heated and often struck the ear of immigrants to the United States, including incredibly lots and lots and lots of legal immigrants, as being racist and as being nativist. That's because, as so often the case, mainstream media loves to find the loudest, the shrillest, the least reasonable person. I did not like McCain-Lieberman. Even though I'm a big proponent of immigration reform and of regularization of the millions of people who are here illegally in the country. I didn't like its security provisions. I didn't like the way that it treated the border. A lot of that has now been remedied. And when a new reform bill is introduced, as it almost certainly will be introduced this session,